your guide to the truth, thenewamericanmedia.com.
Broadcasting to you live from the Milky Way galaxy, my name is Brian Engelman, and this is the Agree to Disagree program here on the New American Media. My guest today, well, this is a show I'm really looking forward to for a number of reasons. My guest today has been brought in to discuss the concept of redemption. The topic of redemption came up most recently for me while watching the Joe Rogan podcast with Tim Pool and the Twitter executives, the legal team, and Jack Dorsey, when they were discussing what is the path to redemption for people when they're kicked off of social media. What is the path to redemption? Most recently, Kyle Kashuv, one of the shooting survivors in one of those high schools, he was accepted to Harvard, and recently screenshots from a private conversation were captured and sent to Harvard, and Harvard withdrew the application. He is no longer allowed to attend Harvard. And you ask yourself, what is the path to redemption? If somebody says things they would like to take back, if somebody does things that embarrasses them, what is the path to redemption? What is a human to do if perfection is expected? What is the path forward to redemption? And so it kind of brought up the Judeo-Christian concept of nobody being perfect except Jesus Christ and the Lord himself. So if there's only perfection in deity form in the heavens, and we're not allowed to correct behaviors that fall short of 100% accuracy, what is left? So my guest today is Jeff Laird. I do know Jeff from high school, but recently I've reconnected with Jeff on social media, and I've really enjoyed his writings, his perspective, his willingness to deep dive and get into topics. And I'm sure you know, even in the social media day and age, where if you start reading somebody and the work that they're putting out, you can tell the education that the person has. Maybe not in all cases, but I really enjoy what Jeff has to say through his writings. And so I reached out to him. Jeff is a writer. He's armed with a wide range of experiences in education, including everything from engineering and martial arts to philosophy and religious studies. Jeff is currently an associate editor with the ministries of gotquestions.org. However, his views expressed today are his own and not endorsed by any other person or group. Jeff, thank you for joining us today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. Appreciate being able to come on.
Hey, I'm excited for this. I just the concept of redemption. You know, we've seen it with social media. So many people getting deplatformed, just being erased, depersoned. It brings up that Brave New World 1984 type, you know, technocrat society questions. But even deeper than that, although, you know, some might say that social media and the internet is becoming the mark of the beast, and if you don't have it, you can't purchase goods and services, and with Amazon strong-arming people out of the market, one day we might be left with nothing but that. But I think perhaps the place I would like to start is the concept of redemption. So that's where we're going to begin. But before we get to that, can you explain to the people who are not familiar with you who you are, where you came from, how you got to where you are today, and digging into these philosophical matters?
Sure. I had been working with gotquestions.org. I had started with them as a volunteer back in 2004. And in a nutshell, Got Questions answers people's queries and questions about biblical and spiritual issues. And one of the things that forces you to do is a lot of research, because you have people who are coming to you asking about social issues, they're asking about political issues, they have questions about history, about theology, morality, ethics, all these different things. So I was doing a lot of that while I was pursuing education and a career in mechanical engineering. And over time, I just found that I was being called more to do that type of theological and counseling work than I was engineering. And the relationship I had with Got Questions eventually went from volunteer to a contract writer to an employee and editor now. So I've had the opportunity over, more than 15 years now to know exactly what it is people are asking about these different issues, how they're thinking about them, the way they're processing them. And it's a very grassroots, ground level view that you get of seeing where people, not just in the United States, but also around the world, are dealing with these issues when the rubber meets the road. In other words, how are actual people in the real world, in their actual lives, grappling with and struggling with the meaning of these different things, these different ideas. And obviously my position is unabashedly Christian. So I look at these things from that lens and from that worldview, but I also recognize that there are people who have other perspectives, and those perspectives need to be understood.
Right. And so, I was talking to you off air as we were preparing the show, and I mentioned that the new thing, and I've seen this with politicians, but especially far left progressive politicians in my estimation, everybody does it. I'll just say everybody does it. But not being from the far left progressive perspective and point of view myself, I see it all the time, where words and phrases are co-opted to try to mean something different, whether marriage is turned into any two people can be together, where traditionally the word meant a man and a woman joining together in holy matrimony. You've seen it with, gender. The whole concept of gender has been changed. There's many more examples, and I'm sure I'll probably jot a few down because it's not just those. But what I've seen lately is the effort to turn the phrase Judeo-Christian into a racist diatribe that must be opposed. It's the dog whistle of the left. So if you hear such a thing, you know that the oppressor, the language of the oppressor, is coming to take your rights away. And Judeo-Christian, I don't know if that's just the anti-Christian bias, the anti-Jewish bias, or maybe it's a combination of the two. But I guess maybe we could start there with the concept of redemption. Is redemption specifically a Judeo-Christian perspective, point of view, viewpoint, and ideology and philosophy that if that is taken down and demonized, we end up with a society where nobody can, in fact, redeem themselves?
Yeah, I think the thing that's important to remember is we talk about something that's called a worldview. And it's easier to discuss a worldview than to discuss something like, say, religion or spirituality, because people get hung up on those terms. But a worldview basically is just your summary of your assumptions and your answers about the way the universe works. It's really just as simple as that. It's the bottom layer of the foundation of your house. The way you view the world, the way you view politics and ethics and everything else like that, that's your world view. And just like a house, you can't get from point A to point B. You can't build something unless there's a foundation that's there to support it. So from a worldview standpoint, not every single idea is equally well supported. You can be inconsistent, but that's dangerous, because if you believe in things or you accept things that don't coordinate with your worldview, sooner or later you're going to have to shed those, or you're going to have to lose them because you have no way to support them. So, for example, from the perspective of people I talk to, if you believe in hardcore atheism, absolute 100% that the universe is entirely undesigned, coincidental, totally without any purpose or reason, technically speaking, you have no grounds to believe that all human beings are equal. You can believe that. Yeah, that's an attitude you're free to have, and most atheists that I know deeply do believe that all people are fundamentally equal. The problem is that that's not supported by the worldview. If we're just matter and atoms bouncing around, then human beings, by definition, are not equal. So when it comes to redemption and things like that in the worldview, you have the same thing going on. If the culture has a worldview that does not support the idea that people can change, that they can be redeemed, that they can be cleansed and made acceptable once again, then you're going to wind up with society that goes back to that pagan concept where it's all honor, shame, and mob justice and permanent dishonor. And I think that's the danger that we're seeing right now in American culture, is we're moving in that direction where once you've been tagged with a certain label, that's just the end of it. It's over, it's done, period. There is really no way to come back from that. And that's mostly because that soothes our sense of mob justice, not because it actually makes good sense. And that's a worldview issue.
All right, and I do understand that, and let me play that devil's advocate, if I may. The mob justice of the Puritans who settled in, on the East Coast of the United States, in their Salem witch trials, was that rooted in Judeo-Christian beliefs, and are the Judeo-Christian beliefs exempt from mob justice itself? Because some marginalized groups of people, I believe, have probably said something similar to that.
Absolutely, and actually, what's really interesting about that is not necessarily as a side note, but as a crucial point, is the attitude towards witchcraft that you see in the Salem witch trials is actually very pagan. Believe it or not, if you read through the Bible and you look at topics like witchcraft, for example, you're not going to find cauldrons and broomsticks and fireballs and hexes and things like that. In the Judeo-Christian concept, that stuff's all fantasy and myth. When the Bible talks about witchcraft, it's really talking about things like communing with spirits, divination, fortune-telling, and so on and so forth. When Christianity started to take over, pagan areas in Europe, their concept of witches actually dwindled. And it was the publication of a lot of books that were sort of like the Da Vinci Code of their era. They took these mythological ideas and blew them out of proportion, and that got a lot of people's attention. That being said, there's definitely been times where people identified with Christianity have fallen into that same mindset. And that's really no different than what you see where you have, let's say, the Red Scare of the 1950s, or the placement of Japanese in internment camps. Those things happened in America, in the United States. And they're not signs that there's something fundamentally wrong with the United States. They're signs that people are drifting away from the principles that they're supposed to be operating under. So what happened in the Salem witch trials definitely feeds that sense of mob justice. It definitely comes from that place. But it's not something that we can look at and see, this is what happens when you follow a particular worldview. It's actually what happens when you deviate from that worldview.
Well, okay, there's 2 points. I want to get to, we've kind of gone past it. Let's start with that. We've kind of gone past it. Let's just circle back and make sure we've defined this for people that, just for everybody. Sometimes I think it's really important, and I see this from Steven Crowder, for example, when he goes onto college campuses or wherever he happens to be, and he does his segments, and he says, let's first define the terms. And I think that's really important because everybody has a different mindset of what something might or might not be. By the way, another example of redefining terms is how biological males are supposed to be allowed to compete with females in, high school and college and professional athletic sports these days. That is a complete redefinition of the purpose of why you have a females-only league. And like I said, I'll probably have 100 more examples of these redefinition of terms. But anyway, when it comes to redemption, can you explain the concept of redemption, how it relates in the lessons taught in the Judeo-Christian worldview? What is the importance and significance of that, and where does that come from in the holy books?
In the Judeo-Christian concept, redemption really comes with this idea that every single person is fundamentally separated from perfection. And in this case, that means God. In other words, every single human being is flawed, and that flaw creates a gap between us and God that cannot be overcome by anything we're capable of doing. This is why Christianity talks about things like grace. So when we say grace and salvation, that's really what it's talking about. Redemption means something that bridges that gap. It restores that relationship. In Christianity, that's salvation that comes by letting God do something we could not do. So Christianity starts with this idea that every single person is fundamentally flawed. Nobody's got the moral high ground to claim that they are perfect. And in order to be redeemed, you have to have some kind of forgiveness. Now, when it comes to God, there's those categories and those rules, but then also with other people. You have to have some kind of means by which to say, yes, this person's made a mistake, but we can restore them to community and restore them to fellowship. In the Judeo-Christian ethic, that's something that's not just allowed, it's demanded. You are expected that you have to be forgiving to other people because God has been forgiving to you. In other words, in the Judeo-Christian ethic, redemption is not an option, it's an obligation. You have to provide people with some means to learn from past sins, to correct themselves, and to move on past them and restore them in some way. So when we talk about redemption, other terms that we could use to sort of parallel that would be things like restoration. There has to be some way to bring that person back into the fold. And in Judeo-Christianity, that's something that you are not merely allowed to do, but you have to do. In the pagan concept, things like mercy were considered a weakness. They were considered emotional responses, not logical, rational experiences. I mean, mercy by definition is something that nobody deserves, otherwise it wouldn't be mercy. But there again, in Judeo-Christianity, nobody deserves mercy. So you're going to kind of have to pick one or the other. We're either going to be in a system where people have some way to say, yep, I messed up, I'm sorry, and then be restored to full participation in society, or you're going to be in a position where every time somebody screws up, we're just going to throw them out.
You know, I had a conversation, and it was one of those conversations, I guess maybe you could probably think to 20 important conversations in your life, just moments that stand out for, you know, maybe a myriad of reasons, if you will. But I remember having a conversation with somebody that was close to me, and we were talking about forgiveness, and I guess you could say mercy or redemption. And their response, let me see if I don't know if I have this exactly, but their response was essentially, when a person says they're sorry or asks for forgiveness, that's just the person's attempt to excuse their behavior. It should never be forgiven. It should always, it was this very vengeful, I'm going to get you eventually one day kind of response. And that's how that person internalized it. Can you speak on that thought? Because I'm trying to go down a few stages here where what does society look like when you view an apology as a weakness and nope, you're just trying to get a cop out, a free pass for your bad behavior. I'm not buying it or accepting it.
If you want to see what that kind of a thing looks like, you can look to the ancient Middle East or to the Greco-Roman Empire without the Judeo-Christian ethic. It's what we call blood guilt or feuds, where there's only one way to resolve an issue, and that's revenge. And obviously, once I've gotten my revenge on you, you don't agree with what's going on, so now you feel it's necessary to get revenge on me. This is why when you read the Old Testament, it talks about something like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Right.
4,000 years later, people look at that and they go, oh, that's so vengeful. No, actually, the reason that the Bible says eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is because it's talking about being fair. It's what they call the lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. In other words, if you knock out my tooth, I'm not morally justified to cut your head off. In other words, reparation for some kind of harm is supposed to be proportional to what's actually going on. And that, again, comes to that Judeo-Christian idea. You don't have a moral right to just annihilate somebody for some perceived slight. And when we look at, for example, the things you were discussing in modern concepts, somebody says something on Twitter 2 years ago that we really don't like or we really don't care for. Okay, maybe that's a reflection of deep racism. Maybe that was just something silly that they said. But are we really just going to erase this person from existence on the basis of that? That's not anything remotely like a redemption or a forgiveness mindset. Now, when your friend said that he thinks that people are just trying to justify their behavior and excuse them, and that's possible. You know, people give insincere apologies and things like that. But I also think if you follow the logic, if we literally never forgive anything that anybody does, sooner or later we're all just going to wind up being totally alone. And society is going to completely collapse because nobody's actually perfect. Sooner or later, everybody's going to do something that they should not do or should not say, to some level and on some extent. And if we're not going to have some kind of redemption or forgiveness, then we're literally going to have nobody who can do anything. And that's why a lot of governments and cultures deify their leaders. That's why North Korea pretends that Kim Jong-il is the world's greatest, you know, politician and pilot and chef and gymnast and pinochle player and whatever else. Because if you have the slightest imperfection, you just can't be in that position.
Yeah, that brings to mind the "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." You know, it's that phrase. It's an eye for an eye will leave the world blind.
That phrase actually continues that concept, because when Jesus had that encounter with the adulterous woman, Jesus, believe it or not, was actually trying to follow the law. If you read the Old Testament law, it says that if somebody's accused of adultery, you're supposed to bring the man and the woman, and it says that the people who make the accusation are supposed to be the ones to throw the first stones. So Jesus was actually looking at the crowd and saying, look, if you're actually going to do this, then you're going to do it right. And he knew they wouldn't.
Well, you know what I've done.
He's actually telling them, you're going to do this right or you're not going to do it at all.
And I've used that concept in my neighborhood in Los Angeles. We had a lot of stray cats. And a lot of underneath the buildings, the little grates, the little mesh screens have been knocked out, or, you know, the cable guy would punch one out and not put it on, and then cats would start breeding underneath. Anyway, over the course of 15 years, we've trapped and neutered and returned the cats over the years. We've repaired and sealed all the buildings, making sure that nothing alive was trapped underneath. It was a long, tedious, expensive, painful process, but it beats the alternative. And what I would tell people, you know, some people would not respond with such compassion, or, you know, they only have so many craps to give, and they weren't going to use them on cats. And they said, "Yeah, I'm going to call the shelter." I'm like, there is no shelter. It's an extermination squad. They capture them and kill them. You don't adopt out cute, cuddly, feral cats. You kill them. I said, so if you want to kill them, I'll let you borrow the trap. You can fill up your bathtub and you can drown it yourself. You can bash its head in yourself. You can shoot it. If you're going to kill it, why don't you kill it? Because there's no, you're not taking this animal to a retirement home, to an old folks home, to summer camp. You're executing it. So if you are not going to think about the ramifications of your action by calling the city, why don't you kill it yourself? And everybody kind of shut up after that, because I think they knew what it meant, but I think putting it in perspective. All right, here's the stone. Throw it. I think then it changes the perspective, where you don't get to offsource or offload or outsource responsibility to, air quote, the government. You know, I think that was interesting how you said dear leader is the best pinochle player in the world, the best pilot in the world, because if there is no God, if there is no supreme being, well, then whoever you're offsourcing I'm combining these words, offshoring and outsourcing. Anyway, you're handing the responsibility over to the government. And I think that when it comes to communism and socialism and Marxism, one of the biggest things they wanted to do was always remove God from the marketplace, right? The marketplace of ideas. Wasn't that always one of the cornerstones of what had to be done in those societies for that reason?
Yeah, that is, and I think you hit on something when you're talking about outsourcing things and stuff like that. Like when you talk about cats and things like that, one of the things that you always tend to see in the pagan concept is that individuals are totally meaningless. They're meaningless and they're powerless. You know, you're just one more little piece floating around there, and that leads people to that attitude of saying, well, somebody should do something. And they'll reach out and they'll grasp for whatever somebody can do the something that they want. You know, so for example, hey, we got to get rid of these cats. No, I don't want to spend money on taking care of them. No, I don't want to spend any money on doing whatever. Okay, then here's a trap. Go ahead and you do something about it. Oh no, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean me. I meant somebody else. Well, yes, in socialism and communism, that's exactly what people are doing. They're saying, look, the only person who can solve this problem is me, your dear leader. And unfortunately, I can't solve the problem that we have as long as you're telling me that I can't do this to you and I can't do that to you. So just trust me that I've got your best interest at heart, and let me do these things and trust that I have your best intentions to go on. And the reason that communism and socialism has to try so hard to get rid of the idea of God is exactly what you just said, is that the Judeo-Christian idea places 100% of the moral responsibility within the person. Now, there is a little bit of a difference in a sense in the way Judaism and Christianity looks at that, but the core idea is that you as an individual have a responsibility. You do not have the ability to just look at the world and go, yep, that's bad. Oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. You know, in the Judeo-Christian concept, if you don't like something, you have an obligation and a responsibility to do something about it. And you yourself have an obligation to be bound by that. Socialism and communism also doesn't like the idea of a power beyond the government. You know, in the Judeo-Christian ethic, a person can look at a government official and say, you're doing something wrong. What you're doing is morally wrong. You do not have a moral right to do this, and I'm going to oppose you because what you're doing is wrong. And in the communist socialist worldview, that's not true. There is no higher power. There's the government, and that's it. There is no higher authority to go to. And that's where I think as we drift away from, you know, the ethical, cultural worldview foundations that the country was founded under, we're going to start running into more of those problems and more of those ideas. And, you know, I think another one that you hit on, you were talking about terminology, for example. You know, you brought up the idea of how we're reusing words in the wrong ways. That's part of how honor, shame, and mob justice works, is you set traps for people. You set up a standard that they can't possibly live up to, and then you destroy them when they fail to meet it.
Right. And all of this talk reminds me of this thing. This is a little, I don't know exactly the origin, but it's the story of 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. I don't know.
Yeah, it's challenging.
It is, because humans have that instinct. You know, you've seen this play out where maybe there's an attack in public and everybody just stands and watches. You know, what is it? What is that quote? Not be the change that you want to see in the world. It's I'm probably combining 3 different things here, but you know, you see this play out where everybody thinks that somebody else should be doing it. One of the funniest things I read on The Onion, one of my favorites was It was like 97% of people believe that everyone else should take public transportation. Nobody wants to give up their car. They just want the roads clear. They don't want the traffic. They don't want to sit on the bus, but everybody else should be doing that because that's the right thing to do.
Right.
And you see governments constantly doing that, telling you what they think everybody else should be doing, but no. The rules do not apply for them. And it really, I think with social media now and the internet in particular, I don't think that people are getting away with nearly as much as they used to, and I think the old guard is having a hard time figuring out how to rule over people that they used to hoodwink when all of their sins, their misdeeds, their transgressions are laid bare. So in a way, the internet might be one of the best all-seeing eyes / God, omnipotent, all-knowing, all-seeing devices we've ever come across. It has the potential for great good and great evil, but in that case, would you agree that in that specific regard, it's maybe one of the best tools we have to fact check as long as we're allowed access to that information?
I would, but tentatively, and kind of to put that devil's advocate side to it there, I think one of the things that the internet provides that's a disadvantage is that it very much feeds into what we call the bread and circuses idea. Mm. So bread and circuses is an idea from the Roman Empire where when the Romans would conquer territory, they didn't just walk in there and slaughter everybody and then post guards on every corner. They would defeat the military, and then they would tell people, look, we'll basically let you live how you want and do what you want. As long as you pay your taxes and let us travel through here as much as we want, this is how it's going to be. And most people accepted that as a deal. And what the Romans would do is they would provide social services, literally bread. They would provide bread for people and circuses. And this is the circuses not with elephants and clowns and stuff like that. This is gladiators and stuff like that. Basically, they would use welfare and entertaining distractions to keep the people pacified. And what that meant was with bread and circuses, people were either too afraid of losing their welfare, too disinterested because they were watching what's going on in the circus, or just too afraid of the military power in order to revolt. And the internet definitely has helped us with communication. It's given us a lot of tools that we can use to communicate with each other. So I would agree that from a fact-checking standpoint, from a free exchange of ideas, it's an excellent thing. And that raises topics that I know you and I have started to touch on before about monopolies and some of those awkward conversations. But it's also provided a means for bread and circuses. If you want to shut down or shame a particular point of view, the internet has made it possible now to do that extremely quickly and very easily. It's very easy to get an opinion out there, even if it's not fact-checked and it's not believed. Look what happened with the Covington Catholic kid.
Exactly.
That's an example of how modern communication actually can turn into a weapon. The correct, in air quotes, correct side of culture decided that there was a certain meaning behind an event, and because of our communication ability, they were able to spread that viewpoint everywhere, instantaneously. And by the time anybody bothered to stop and think about what was really going on, it basically had become the accepted truth. So, yes, the internet's got some advantages, but in a weird way, I would almost say that the internet could turn out to be the biggest weapon that this cultural movement has, because by definition, it allows for this honor, shame, and mob justice, and so on and so forth. I mean, in the real world, if you want to completely shun somebody and remove them, you're either going to have to physically move them or you're going to have to kill them.
Right.
Right? But on Twitter, all I have to do is click a button. Poof, down the memory hole. As far as Twitter's concerned or Facebook is concerned, that person doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah, and
so it's good, but it also opens up a lot more avenues for people to abuse that power.
You don't need to love Louis Farrakhan or you don't need to love Alex Jones to come to an opinion on whether or not they should be allowed to say the things that they say. And the First Amendment allows people to be who they are. And people are going to be people that say things they'd like to take back, they'd like to walk back. And the First Amendment allows people to be vile, disgusting human beings if they want to. And I think then the marketplace determines, who you want to associate with based on that information. I don't think it's helpful to drive more speech underground, or to almost like when Howard Stern was on terrestrial radio, everything was a code word for something else, and it almost made it way dirtier to try to listen to him not break, FCC violations. It almost makes it dirtier, and there's a concern that if you drive more speech underground, you're not going to have a chance to change the opinions, change the minds, and have the conversations before they get out of control, and you don't see it coming.
Right.
Where a wave, if there's a wave of people, whether it's Milo Yiannopoulos or Steven Crowder or Gavin McInnes, go down the list. Laura Loomer, it's the list is pretty much ever expanding, and we're all going to end up on it. If all of these people are taken offline, those ideas don't go away. The ideas continue. It just turns those people into martyrs. And I think without freedom of speech to vent and release that pressure, I think we're playing with a really potentially dangerous situation. Would you tend to agree?
Oh, absolutely. I think to tie that into what we're talking about with the idea of redemption is if you have a society or a culture, a worldview that doesn't take redemption as a possibility, then that's exactly what you do. You basically present somebody with only two options. You either conform or we'll destroy you. And for some people, what you're basically telling them is, we're not going to discuss this, we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to communicate with you. And there's a lot of people who will choose that oblivion. Like you said, you're just driving it underground. And let's take something extreme, legitimate Nazism, for example, just something that we can agree is, aberrant and disgusting and so on and so forth. Just flat out. Which by the way, back the Third Reich kind of thing.
Which by the way, let me jump in there, because my understanding is on YouTube, if you say that word and it's picked up by their supercomputers, or if you type it into the show liner notes, you're instantly demonetized, deranked, deboosted, shadow banned, all of the things. Like you can't eat. Like you saw it, my buddy Ford Fish. Please don't lose your train of thought if you have a notebook. Take.
Oh no, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, because my friend Ford Fisher with News to Share, I did an episode with him a couple weeks ago. He got caught up. I called him the dolphin caught in the tuna nets with the Carlos Maza with Vox and NBC trying to shut down Steven Crowder's channel. He got demonetized. His whole channel got taken off, News to Share, because he goes to rallies, he goes to protests, he goes to riots, and he films. He tries to keep himself as out of the conversation as humanly possible, and he got caught up in it. So did a history professor, because he had archival footage of, you can't even say the word or type the word out, because there were pictures of that guy from that 1940s German political party. You can't even say it.
Right.
He got taken down as a historian. So you end up in this really weird space where you can't even call something what it is. Two other examples of words changing were the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, definitely used to call transgenderism a mental illness. And they're trying to change that as to, it's totally fine and totally normal. And then you have the racism, trying to change what racism means to say, no, racism can only be from a group who holds power over another. No, so basically it's only white people can be racist, because white people are the only ones who traditionally have had power, and nobody else can be racist. Where I thought racism was ugly, evil, hate-filled ideology from anybody. No. It's only whitey that can be the bad guy. So anyway, just two other examples of what I was thinking of, and I wanted to get that other point across about being caught up in this. So I'm sorry. Can you get back to what you were saying? I totally railroaded you there.
Yeah. No, not a problem. Let's say somebody holds some ideology that's awful. We'll just call it ideology X. Okay, they got X, and that's what they believe, and that's what they think. All right, if you look at that person, you say, look, we are going to absolutely refuse you any ground to talk about this. We're not going to let you discuss it. We're not going to let you even mention it or bring it up in a public space.
Mm-hmm.
That person is more likely to go and look for other people who do want to discuss it, who do want to talk about it. So like you said, it winds up driving them directly into the arms of people who are going to feed this ideology X that they have. Then what you've got is an echo chamber. Now what you're doing is you're taking people who believe something that most people would think of as aberrant and awful, and they're just gathering together and commiserating and having this camaraderie about the fact that nobody wants to listen and nobody understands. On the flip side, if you tell the person with ideology X, look, you can go ahead and talk about it if you want, and we're going to let as many people who want to explain just how ignorant you are, then the person's actually going to be confronted with alternative ideas. Then other people, the sideline watchers, the visitors, the people who aren't actually involved in this, get the chance to actually hear the conversation and go, oh, yeah, okay, now I see why this is gross.
Right.
So yes, if you drive it underground, you just make it fester, and you just make it worse. And that's exactly how extremist movements get born. There's a reason why Muslims in the West don't resort to terrorism, but everybody wants to blame Islam for people blowing each other up in the Middle East. And really, it's got more to do with politics. If you're in the Middle East and you're 19 years old and you can't vote, your economy has no kind of a job, and you feel like you have zero voice whatsoever, nobody's going to listen to you, nobody's going to give you any ability to say anything or do anything, then what do you have left to change things that you think are awful? For a lot of people, it's really easy to convince a kid like that he needs to become violent, and he needs to go and hurt people in order to get his way. The ideal of the American system is supposed to be to tell people every single one of you has a voice. You can get up in public and you can talk and you can say and you can argue and you can contend using your words, using your speech, using your voice. And the best way to avoid extremism and the best way to avoid radicalizing people is not to stuff them in a closet. That's like trying to wash your gym socks by wadding them up in a ball and sticking them in a garbage bag under your sink. You know,
that's a very specific.
That's not going to work.
It ain't going to work. No, and you know no. What's happened in American culture over the past few years, you know, and you saw it, you know, and I would definitely, you know, right or wrong, I'm going to place a lot of this at the footsteps of Barack Obama and the community organizing / agitating that he grew up on, the Chicago way. It's a really mafia kind of tactic. We saw it with Black Lives Matter starting to block roads and starting to, you know, it kind of culminating in that assassination of the police officers down in Dallas. And it really is just stirring up racial animosity through a divide and conquer technique. A lot of people were hoping, look, we have a half white, half black president. Wouldn't it be awesome to kind of put some of this racial strife behind us? Look at this. This is a step in the right direction. We're not caring about what someone looks like or their ethnicity or their heritage. Like, we're just going on who we think would be the best leader. Isn't this great? Unfortunately, I think it was one of the worst decisions we could have made because he was not a uniter. He was a divider. And what I saw the rise of Antifa. So it was Black Lives Matter maybe kind of morphing into Antifa maybe over the past couple of years after his term, where the mob rule, the mob justice, they are the ones that determine we are going to be the judge and the jury and executioner, and we are going to determine what speech is allowed, what actions are allowed, what monuments can stand, who can drive to and from traffic on this freeway. And it's turned into a... Let me just ask you, Jeff, what have you seen this turn into?
I think that the thing that we're seeing, and you know, you've heard me phrase it this way before, it's a return to pagan cultural ethics, where in the pagan mindset, you have what's called an honor-shame culture, which means it's the culture that determines what's right or wrong based on their whims and their feelings at that particular time. And it also means that the only thing that matters is publicity. It doesn't really matter whether what what you're doing is right or wrong according to some objective idea that somebody else has. All that matters is whether or not you're bringing positive or negative vibes to your tribe. And that does a couple things. One of the things it does is it creates completely different classes of people. Okay? There's a certain guy in a certain colored house in a certain city who once referred to a group of people as fine people, if you remember that. There's some fine people on both sides, that whole thing.
Yes.
And that got turned left, right, and sideways into some justification of something that, in context, was totally not what was said.
Taken
Absolutely
very out of
not
context.
The point that was being made. So for that person in that cast, that's just an unforgivable sin. You're going to be judged harshly, and you're going to be judged according to that. On the flip side, we have a presidential candidate who made comments about brass knuckles and a physical revolution, and people just kind of shrug their shoulders. Why?
Selective
because
outrage.
if the mob engine's not willing to generate outrage over it, then it doesn't really matter. If he's not actually bringing shame on his group, then it's okay.
Yeah, Joe Biden
And
gets the
that's what
free
we're
pass
starting
for
to see.
all of the groping and the selective outrage about those really you nailed it. Those comments should sink the campaign. You can't be calling for violent revolution and brass knuckles, and that's specifically ridiculous. But it's swept under the rug.
From my perspective, actually, the way I look at it is to say it shouldn't sink the campaign. And I know what you mean is if we're going to be fair, if leftists are going to use fair accounting, then yes, a leftist should think that should sink Joe Biden's campaign. As somebody who does believe that people can be prone to making mistakes, I'm the type who says that Joe Biden should have the ability to have people look at him and say, what is that supposed to mean? What are you talking about, brass knuckles? Are you insane? In this climate, you're going to talk about that? And he should have the ability to say, you know what, you're right, I'm sorry, that was just dumb, it was an off-the-cuff remark, that's not what I meant, look at my record, I've never advocated for violence. Okay, fine. That's the way we should be able to do this. And Joe Biden doesn't even have to do that because he's a member of the preferred caste. On the flip side, you've got the orange man bad stuff that's basically going to say it doesn't matter how many times people explain it. We're just going to assume that it means something bad, and that's the end of it.
Right. Well, the one thing that I did get to see over the past, one of the most exciting things that I've seen break in the world of news was the Oberlin College situation, where it was a bunch of social justice warrior it was calling for heads on stakes, heads on pikes, pitchforks and torches,
right,
trying to destroy a bakery because people were in there shoplifting. Somebody cried racism, and they tried to ruin this family of several generations back into the 1800s who've operated there and worked in the community. They just wanted to destroy something. They wanted heads on sticks. And I believe it was $33 million that was awarded, and who knows how that's going to hold up on appeal, but I mean, are you at least encouraged seeing some stuff like that where there's a little bit of legal balancing now kind of coming into fruition, where some of the actions of the mob are starting to become tangible and painful to the pocketbooks of the administrators who have been allowing this, dare I say, encouraging it, like the politicians?
Yeah, I mean, it could be encouraging. The downside of it is that sometimes when you have something like that, sometimes those corrections just embolden the other side to double down even harder. You can see examples of that, like with the Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado. The guy was sued because even though he was willingly serving, same-sex customers, even though he was willing to sell a particular couple of cakes, he said, I can't use my personal expression to support something that I don't agree with. So they sued him, and the Civil Rights Commission of the state got smacked down hard for the way that they were coming down on this guy. And what happened immediately after that case? They sued him again. A transgender activist went after the exact same guy afterwards and sued him again. And then they settled that out of court, and then that person went after him a third time. So it's good to see those kinds of things happen because, I do think they're going to give pause to people who try to be, completely reactionary and insane. But at the same time, sometimes it's just a sign that people are going to try even harder and do even worse. So it'll be interesting to see how all that actually plays out. Will something like Oberlin College make people go, ooh, maybe we need to be careful about associating our institution with pitchforks and torches. Maybe we need to calm down a little bit. I hope so, but I don't know if it will.
Yeah, and we're going to see as we ramp up to 2020 with the elections. Jeff, we've pretty much reached the end of today's program, and I told you off air, I feel like we could probably do a 5-hour show, and it would feel like 5 minutes, and we should probably try to do some more of these regularly. So what
Sure.
I'm thinking is, why don't you kind of put this into perspective, take the final 2-3 minutes, wrap up the concept of redemption for us. Obviously, this was stemming from the Kyle Kashuv, but it's way deeper than one person saying a few things in a private conversation 2 years ago. It's about society in general. How do you want to leave us with this conversation? What are the final points from you, sir?
I think the biggest thing that we have to remember is that a government or a culture, and all government is just whatever the people of the culture allow it to be. So a government and a culture empowered to destroy people for unpopular opinions is eventually going to do that to you and your children. You cannot have these kinds of situations and circumstances without there being consequences. And this is a theme that's not just seen in Judeo-Christianity, but we also see it in secular literature and poetry, this idea of, the hangman. And first they came for this person, and then they came for that person, and then they came for me, and there was nobody left to stand for me. In the Judeo-Christian ethic, redemption is something that's actually possible. There's a objective sense of right or wrong, and if a person's actually seen to violate that, there is a means for that person to be restored to the community. And the harder and the faster we try to ignore that and run away from it, just because the less opportunities we give for redemption. And what that means is a society where anybody can be annihilated for any reason at any time. Sooner or later, somebody in government is going to turn that around on the people. And folks who think it's a great idea when it's targeting conservatives and white people and Christians are going to be really, really surprised when those cannons are flipped upside down.
Absolutely. Yeah, the quote, Martin Niemöller, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Jeff, I appreciate your time. Like I said, I think we should do some more of these on a more regular basis. We'll talk off air, trying to figure out what might work. But I do always enjoy this and maybe really focus. I think we did a pretty good job sticking to the focus of the redemption topic today. Would you agree? I think that worked pretty well.
I think so.
All right, good. Well, then, do you want to tell people where they can find you, or is there any place you want people to link up with you, or on the way out the door, any place you would like people to come find you?
I'm usually not much of a come find me kind of a person, but if people are interested in some of the perspectives that we deal with, they can always check out gotquestions.org. That's the ministry that I work for. Obviously, that's a very specifically Christian and unashamedly Christian perspective on things. But I think we do a very good job of presenting a rational and a balanced kind of idea. People who I've actually got some contact or communication with can probably find me on Facebook.
Excellent. Yeah, I jotted down the question. There's probably 20 questions that I got to, and I didn't want to take us off track, but I said, if God is perfect, why wouldn't he make us perfect? Talking about how we fall short of the glory of God and how we're fallible creatures, and, why...
Yep.
If that guy's so perfect, why did he make us messed up? But, of course, that may be for another topic for another day. But, yeah, check out gotquestions.org. Maybe there's some stuff there. But, Jeff, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me. We will do this again soon. And thank you for your time. You have a great day, sir.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. There goes Jeff. That was great. That was focused. That was clear. And just wrapping this up on my perspective, that conversation that I had about forgiveness and the reaction being, that's just something selfish people say to make themselves feel better. And Jeff alluded to, there are people that do offer insincere apologies, and that is probably part of the cake, the pie chart. Mitch Hedberg has that joke. what is the joke? He went into a pizza place and they gave him the slice where it would be if somebody won $1 million, they gave him the donate to charity slice, the little tiny slice. So there is a slice of the pie where some people are definitely probably just saying sorry and they're insincere, but there are probably much larger pieces of that pie, that pizza pie, where people looking for redemption and looking to be better and looking to correct. You can't correct wrongs, but you want to learn from it and maybe not do that anymore. I think if you're going to write off an apology and if you're going to write off if someone wants to write off a sincere attempt to apologize, recognize a wrongdoing, raise their hand, take blame, admit the guilt, and say, in hindsight, I wish that wouldn't have happened. I would have changed it and done it this way. I don't know. I think an eye for an eye leaves the world blind. And if someone's not willing to accept a reasonable apology, I think it's that person's fault. I think the person who's going to have vengeance in their heart, I think that's going to be like Maya Angelou said talking to Dave Chappelle. Anger is something that does no good for the person who possesses that emotion. It's a cancer. All it does is rots you away on the inside, David. Talking about the civil rights movement of the 60s and watching all the civil rights leaders that were killed get killed. Said, yeah, I remember it, but I can't be angry because it's a venom. It will poison me if I hold on to it. If I hold on to the toxin, it's going to infuse itself into me. So you got to let some of that stuff go. And you got to just have trust sometimes that people might be willing to change and be better. And of course, if people continue to be monstrous, yeah, at some point you just think that they're all completely insincere and full of it. And you have the right to do that as well. Special thanks to Jeff Laird. Check him out at gotquestions.org. Post your comments below. Any of the conversation that we had today, if it piques your interest. Love to read your thoughts on it. Get your opinions, your perspectives. What did this show get you thinking about? I think it's really important. Thank you for your time. My name is Brian Engelman for Agree to Disagree and the New American Media. I appreciate you. I love you. We'll talk again soon. Peace.
Your guide to the truth. The New American Media.com.